know about the floor, but the stage is mine right now. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As we move more and more towards the practical aspects of an innovation network, the question that has been posed to us by the organizers is how do we build an innovation ecosystem at scale and at speed? That's what every governor of a state in the US wants to know. That's what every government across the world wants to know. Municipal leaders want to know it. And everybody wants to be successful. And yet, the experience that we have is that not all of these innovation centers work. And it's the same big hubs that we face, whether it's biotech in the United States, we're talking about Boston or San Diego or the Research Triangle, or if we're talking about tech, we're talking about Austin, Silicon Valley. So how do we build the new hubs, successful hubs? Easy question. We have the best panelists here that will tell you all the secrets and will give you all the information. So please come up. And I hope you don't mind short introductions, because that's exactly what I'm going to do. I think that everybody in this room can Google people and find all the information about their CVs, but what you want to hear is the wisdom from them and the experience. So let's start with the Senior Vice President for Research from Georgetown University, Dr. Spiros Dimolitsas. Spiro, let's start at the very basics, right? Because in order to have an innovation ecosystem, you need to have ideas. And you need to have also the right culture and the right environment to accelerate, or in some cases, if it's the wrong culture and the wrong environment, it creates an impediment for the creation of new ideas and the innovation process. Can you tell us a little bit about this environment, and where do you think are the critical factors?
Yes, thank you. I've been in many conferences like this one, and we typically always talk about the conditions that are necessary for innovation. Access to capital, access to talent, a stable political environment, favorable regulation, but we almost never talk about culture. So today I'm going to share with you 10 culture traits that I believe are important in whether innovation is accelerated at scale or impeded. So the first one, which has actually been studied academically a little bit, is collaboration, teamwork, and individualism. So cultures that value individual contribution tend to do better in innovation than cultures that do not. And cultures that value individual contribution balanced with the ability to be an effective member of a team do even better. So that's a cultural trait where the people compete and can collaborate at the same time. The second trait is what I call constructive competition. So you can have constructive competition or destructive competition. Constructive competition is when you're faced with a competitor, you focus on doing much better than they do in order to compete. Destructive competition is when you're faced with a competitor, you try to destroy them at the expense potentially of trying to focus on doing better. So one is basically hiring the bar, the other one is lowering the bar. The third one is social confidence. I won't elaborate much on that one, but that is basically the trait that anybody believes that they can be the best, no matter which background they come from. The next one, the fourth one, is hierarchy and authority. Do cultures promote or encourage or accept challenge to authority? For example, if we look at our own universities, do students get trained or allowed to challenge their professors? Or are they expected to sit there and consume material that is given to them without necessarily being able to challenge it? And the same thing applies to companies as well. You know, are they allowed to challenge the supervisors? Are they allowed to move up and down the hierarchy without friction? Or is it a very hierarchical infrastructure? The fifth trait is meritocracy and nepotism. Again, are the best opportunities offered to those who are the best, or to somebody's cousin or brother or a relative? Employment stability is an interesting one. Is it valued to be working for the same company for a long time, for example, or a short time? After all, creativity often comes by cross-fertilization when people move around. So cultures that promote the ability to be fluid and to be moving from one employer to another tend to do better again in innovation. Diversity is another factor. I'm not going to elaborate on that. Acceptance of corruption is another factor. You can imagine what that does to innovation. But an interesting one is indulgence and restraint. Cultures that are indulgent tend to do better in innovation than cultures that are constrained or restrained. Why? Indulgent cultures tend to want to do more, and they tend to be more optimistic, while restrained cultures tend to be more pessimistic and cynical of success. And then the last one that you all will recognize, but I'll give it a little bit of a different twist, is risk. Is risk valued? And how do we perceive, successful risk versus failure risk? If you succeed, of course, if you've taken a risk and you succeed, of course, the reward is typically financial rewards, good financial rewards. But what about if you fail? Are you condemned and damned from ever participating in innovation? Or is your wisdom of failure used to present you with new opportunities? After all, they usually say an expert is somebody who has failed in all possible ways. So do we really take advantage of that, or do we penalize it? So those are my 10 factors of what could accelerate or impede scaling up in innovation, and they're all cultural traits.
That's a wonderful list. The only thing that I would add to this list is diversity as well, because it provides diversity of thoughts and opinions in the process. And since we're going to market in a very diverse market, eventually the products, I think it helps significantly. I would also, by the way that I would like to do this, if any of you have anything to add or to ask from any of the speakers, feel free.
Or disagree.
We're going to have a discussion. I don't want to have lectures, so thank you for being short. Anything for Spiros before I go to Catherine? All right, Catherine Warren is the CEO of Edmonton Unlimited in Canada, and she has spent time in the US and in the UK. And Catherine, in the preparation that we had for this session, I got your passion, right? About the most important part is that we need to remember that most innovators are young. They are younger than the majority of the people in this room. By now, what we're dealing with is the tail end of the millennials in terms of a generation, and maybe the beginning of the generation Z. So from your perspective, right, what motivates and inspires these young people, and what kind of global problems do you think that they are interested in?
Well, first of all, to say that to participate with all of you in timeless and modern Greece is really an inspiration, and I want to thank Deborah and Roberto for your leadership at a time when we really need it most, right? So as with many of you at the summit that I've had a privilege of having a conversation with, I benefited from an interdisciplinary education. I studied physics combined with humanities and arts and culture, and all of this was inspired by Greek thought. But what stood out for me from this education was that everything I was learning had people and purpose at its core. That's the way my college, Reed College, taught undergraduates. And so this is something that young people, particularly young entrepreneurs, tell us that they crave, and increasingly they tell us that they demand this. And innovation increasingly is going to depend on interdisciplinarity. And I think while it includes technology, of course, it's not synonymous with technology. And that's part of why in our Canadian city of Edmonton, where I run the Municipal Innovation Authority, we consider our competitive advantage to be an inclusive innovation economy, or what we call a tech plus ecosystem. So this is innovation by all with diverse peoples. It embraces things like sustainable innovation, arts and culture innovation, and indigenous innovation, to name a few. And it also showcases innovation in the public realm. So it kind of lifts that gauzy veil or that business-to-business veneer off innovation and showcases it, creating a sense of innovation and identity and pride in the citizens. And then you ask me about young people, and youth tell us that they want to work on what I call triple bottom line problems. So people, planet, and prosperity. They understand things like doing well and doing good are actually not mutually exclusive, that they're interconnected. And so in Edmonton, we are, by one metric, North America's fastest growing tech sector. But what really makes my heart soar is that more than 50% of our entrepreneurs identify as tackling a global challenge. These are things like the climate emergency, public health, food security, digital democracy, and reconciliation for Indigenous peoples. So that's pretty staggering. And if we can really lean into that, I think it gives us an additional competitive advantage. So in this perma-crisis that we've been talking about as elders, all of us here, we don't have a lot of time to create a legacy. So as we like to say in Hockey Crazy Canada, we have to keep our skates on. And as I remember from Pericles, who is the first male citizen of Athens, obviously the first citizen of Athens was his mom, he told us that what you leave behind is not what's engraved in the monuments, it's what is woven into the lives of others.
Thank you. Any questions for Catherine? I'm wondering, because Catherine brings in a Western, North America, European perspective. If we look into Middle East or Asia, are the motivations among the young people similar or different?
Maybe I wouldn't divide it Middle East or Asia. I would say developed markets.
Yep.
When you have the full infrastructure, it's more or less ecosystem and the big players. And
That's
then,
a good correction, thank
you. Emerging markets. No, it's my definition, how actually I would say. That is a bit different because in our part of the world, when we consider innovation, we certainly would like to see inspire people to go, and it's something that's broad. What we are focusing today, it's more like looking at the power players. I mean, the power innovators. Someone is actually then 10% of them produce 80 or 90% of results. And we focus on this more differentiated approach. And what we see that it's more like in our part of the world, it's a lot of buzzwords, but there is no so much capability. And from that point of view, when we look at the capability, we consider what is actually motivates people. And what we see today, it's a motivation for people. They consider that they may be next Google or Facebook. That is something they dream about, the Silicon Valley ideas and bringing it's a more globalization to bring their ideas internationally, while actually the local landscape is a bit different. And it's primarily it needs innovation on the local level, and that is the like a mismatch we have internally in Kazakhstan. And maybe I'll just later on will share on the capabilities. And from that point of view, it's a bit different. It's certainly we have the young people, you know, it's talents are spread it out evenly. I mean, it's opportunities that is defined how actually it's if they're available to these talents in our country.
In the Middle East, it's probably a little bit different from country to country, but I will elaborate on my experience in Qatar in general. Innovation entrepreneurship is a relatively new notion in the Middle East and the GCC, but what I have seen at Qatar University, for instance, among students or faculty, what motivates them towards innovation is the notion that innovation is about value creation and is about impact, whether techno, socio-economic, or environmental. I saw both sides with the students, the undergrad students, and a little bit of probably differentiation with the female. They are more into the social value than the males, that they are more into the economic value. And for the faculty and researchers, the scientists, they are eager to see their work that they have been doing in R&D for many years that transfer into something beyond publications and beyond patent, something that's real in the market. So that's what I have seen personally.
The two are not necessarily contradicting each other, the two perspectives, because I'm sure the young people in North America and Europe also want to see some socioeconomic movement, right? But I think it's how it's phrased that it's a little bit different, and what really is the motivation there. And it's the language, it's the communication component.
So that was our language in the university when we communicated innovation entrepreneurships, whether to the senior leadership or the faculty or the students. In countries probably like Egypt or Algeria, where the economy is very challenging, probably the motivation is more about survival and making things flourish. I'm not sure about it, I haven't been there, but I just told my experience in Qatar so far.
Right, so let me introduce Elder. We're jumping around, but Elder Abrazakov is the CEO of Centras Group in Kazakhstan. And from your perspective, Elder, as a financial expert and individual, can you help us focus on the steps that take place from the conception of an idea, right, and initial innovation to public impact, which is what we are asked here? What's the framework? What is the support that is needed during this process to go from idea to public impact?
Yeah. Maybe I'll just share my experience also as a business person, like wasting and losing so much money. I mean, actually, while trying to bring the innovations, it's one side, it's internally, as a CEO, I need to decompose innovation. And we look at decomposing the innovation by looking what is the three main, decompose as a capability, or let's say one innovation is a process. When we look at that, what is important, we consider it certainly it's bringing practices into the corporation, tools and institutions. Because we may discuss different ideas. Sometimes it's it's easy to copy the success, but it's, virtually it's impossible. And what we see that if you are not introducing certain practices internally, when the people at the end of the day, actually, that is drives their everyday actions, that's the practices. You bring the practices. It may be agile practices, but I would say the concept of MVP, something should be there, because as you see that you have the MVP concept, and it's people in the right direction. The tools are also important, because it's like when the people, they need to speak the same language. And usually what we have the different introduction tools. For example, we invented, internally we used Run, Grow, Transform. One is actually we go to the level of the manager level. One is actually we push them. We don't want to create the serial killers of innovations, but would like to have the more broad spread, because the important thing in innovation is organizational learning. Because you may have the certain single talents, but you need the organization to learn, and that is important. And that brings the institution internally, because you need to bring up and talents internally, and you should look how actually they get a certain support. You need to introduce different structures, like we have the stretch task, we need the sprints, we need a different institution which will support. And that, from that point of view, I would say the innovation as a CEO, we decompose. It's practices, tools, and institution. That is critical.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Mahmoud Abdul Wahed has the longest title in this conference. He is responsible for strategic innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic development at Qatar University. And I love the fact that you have all three of these titles, and maybe you can help us, first of all, with the confusion of the terms, because sometimes people talk about innovation entrepreneurship as being one thing, and it's not. There are distinct differences there. But also, how can we connect these steps from innovation to entrepreneurship to economic development? And how can we catalyze this so we can have it at speed?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mikhail. I actually was stunned by your observation, because they are actually really distinctive but connected. So my background is systems engineering and innovation management, and we know in a science background that to move idea all the way to the market, there is a value chain that needs to be achieved. And this value chain is innovation, and then entrepreneurship, commercialization, finally commercialization, economic development. So this is how was the strategic design of the office, of which the title came from. And this office followed a strategy actually across the university that we developed back in 2018 that also focused on innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic development. And in this strategy, we started with culture. So we did a lot of activities to infuse the culture of innovation, entrepreneurship in the university. And then we focused on competency building through training programs and also through spreading entrepreneurship education across the curriculum. So it's not just a business school, it's not in engineering school, but across all the components. And then in the third pillar, we started building the programs and activities to support startups, buildings, ventures, and commercialization of university assets. And in the fourth pillar, we worked on the structure and the governance model to enable this. And hence came the Office of Strategic Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development. So in each of these pillars, innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic development, there are certain enablers that we try to build in the university to enable this value chain. And at any of these three pillars, if there is a break in the value chain or there is a weakness in the value chain, we will not find the innovations that are happening in the colleges and research centers go all the way to the market. And if I want to simplify things in a very system-level approach, economic development is the final outcome of what we do. And to have this final outcome, in particular the innovation economy, we need to innovate in new products and services and so on. And this happens in the colleges, in the research center, and across the university. And the process to take these innovations all the way to an economic impact is the entrepreneurship and building the enterprises, starting from idea all the way to startup, scalable, and potential venture. So that is the distinctions, but they need to work all together in one approach. And to give you example, and for the audience example, how this accelerated actually a lot, the development of the ecosystem at the university. The office started actually operations formally around 10 months ago in January 2022. And in the 15 years prior to that, we didn't have a single spin-off from the university. We had the Center for Entrepreneurship, we had the IP functions and so on, but things didn't work out because the value chain was broken across the whole process. So what we try to do is to bring these functions together under one governance and one structure, and then building all the programs that bridge the gaps in the university. As we speak, we have now 3 startups, faculty-driven startups being registered, 2 more in the process. We have 20 teams that are incubated currently, and we expect in 2023, in the first two quarters, to have another 20 teams to be incubated. This gives a kind of clear example how proper ecosystem design can actually accelerate and scale up activities. Another example, we're using in our execution an agile methods that's coming from product development in the software engineering. And in this agile methods, we start with pilots, we test the pilots on the ground, and then we see if they work, we scale up across the university. And we started scaling up across the whole country. We just finished a national program for startup development in which 90 faculty, researchers, and graduate students actually participated. And this is the largest ever participation in Qatar and probably in the Middle East. I'm not sure, probably in Saudi Arabia, they may have something similar. But it gives also another examples how proper design and how a proper execution based on innovation management can lead to actually acceleration and then scaling up.
Great, thank you. Dr. George Nunes is the chair of the board and the director also of Demokritos, as we know the institution affectionately, all of us who are in the science and engineering in Greece. And I think the official name is the National Center of Scientific Research.
Yep.
George, we heard a lot about the Greek experience and success. And we heard a lot about outcomes, about trust, and about bringing innovative companies here. But I would like to focus a little bit more about homegrown innovation in Greece. We heard from Mr. Smirlis a little bit about it. And tell us a little bit more about changes in policies, changes in culture that facilitated the homegrown innovation process.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. It's a great pleasure, great honor to be part of this panel. And it's exactly as you said it, high power innovation ecosystem, fast moving innovation ecosystems is so much easier said than done. And in Greece, we had to be innovative in order to get these things, these ecosystems going. Let me start that I couldn't agree with Catherine more about innovation having to span all society and be inclusive from climate change all the way to inclusive digital democracy. But I will focus my narrative for Greece on technology-driven innovation. I mean, being at the largest research center of Greece. So Greece is still ranked as a moderate innovator country, which means that the big international venture capital funds are still away. They are not here to invest. And this has to change. And the greatest, the greatest defect, the weakest link in this innovation ecosystem has been traditionally the relationship between the Greek universities and the research centers and the industry. Now, if you consider that 80% of the Greek research system is public, this could be devastating if there is no really existent, efficient, having value-creating relationship between the universities and the industry. The inefficiency of Greek public organizations to attract private funds, I think this has been the focus of our efforts in Greece the last few years. So research centers had to develop very fast and very efficient technology transfer policies, technology transfer centers, managing IP, being able to negotiate IP contracts all over the world, being able to defend IP all over the world. These were all new to us, so we had to attract talent, we had to invest a lot on building these kind of capacities. And at the same time, we had to establish new for Greece things like programs for industrial fellowships. We had to welcome in the Greek public organizations, research organizations, venture capitals, local, but also global. And this started producing, of course, results. But right away, we've also seen that if you want to have a fast-moving ecosystem in technology, you have to expand very rapidly and embrace all these disruptive, emerging fields. So we have done a lot of investments in artificial intelligence, of course, and robotics, autonomous vehicles, autonomous motion, but also autonomous systems in manufacturing. And only 2 months ago, we celebrated the foundation of the first Institute of Greece for quantum computing. We all see the second big quantum revolution coming. The country has to be ready. And immediately, as you set these things in motion, you see the response. You see the response worldwide. You see the response coming in with global incentives from companies as well. Actually, I would say primarily from companies and VCs. The other thing that worked very uniquely in Greece is, and the research centers of Greece, such as Demokritos, is support for entrepreneurial, for technology entrepreneurial efforts, not only in the matter of spin-offs and spin-outs, which is, of course, a must, but also of policies that are working for spinning in. Startups that are created in the country are given a lot of support in the research centers. They are given access to research facilities, unique research facilities, such as this in these disruptive technologies. So we are welcoming startups to be part of the ecosystem, share the same campus with the public research laboratories. This has created a lot of value. This we have seen is creating a lot of new ideas, a lot of new momentum. It's really, I can definitely call it a game changer. Last thing for Greece, because of the politics, the geopolitics, and the Greek innovation ecosystem, is opening up to defense. That was something that Greece hadn't done for many years. In the last couple of years, it's been opening up, and it's growing very fast. This is defense at the national level, at the European level, and at the level of the North Atlantic Alliance. And we've seen great benefits in taking these steps. Startups in this area, especially the ones that provide dual type of technologies for defense and civil applications and exploitations, they do great, and they really move fast forward.
Thank you.
So it has to be many aspects of the same thing in order to set it up.
I hope everybody is taking notes.
You cannot, that's the recipe for the soup, yeah.
I moved to South Carolina from Chicago 4 months ago, and I spent the last 7 years there. And when we're talking about innovation, I always remember a very early meeting that I had with the mayor of the city. Rahm Emanuel was the mayor at that time. And I asked Rahm, I said, what is the plan? What is the strategy? What kind of innovation do we want to have in this city? Are we after the biotech sector? Are we after the tech sector so I can assist as the university? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know and I don't care. I'm trying to create the environment for the right people to be here, to be people-friendly, to attract young people, and then let them do whatever they want. They will figure it out. With this in mind, whether you agree or not, you may completely disagree with this. I would like to ask that if you were a mayor, let's say of the city of Ioannina, that you're going there, most of you are going next week, where would you place your bet? What do you think are the most important and attractive opportunity areas to focus the efforts of a city? And let's take Ioannina out of the picture, because you can tell me, I don't know anything about Greece, so I don't know what the strengths of Ioannina is. But if you were a mayor of the city and you wanted an innovation area, how would you go after it? What would be the first steps, the first selection that you would make? And let's assume you have a university nearby.
Are you asking to go first?
You volunteer.
Oh, no, I didn't volunteer, but I'm glad to go first. Okay, so if I was the mayor of Washington, D.C., I guess, yep, which is the city I know, I would say much has been talked about the digitization, the digital economy. But if I have to place a bet, for the next century, I think it's going to be the century of life sciences and biotechnology, and that's where I would place the bet. Of course, I completely agree with Rahm Emanuel that you need to create the infrastructure to allow anything that, can take root to grow. But I would bet on biotech, life sciences, and biotechnology.
And Catherine, based on what I read about you, you're almost the mayor of Edmonton.
Not at all, not at all. Well, we have an enlightened mayor for the city of Edmonton. And one of the things that he's focused on is investment into the startup and scale-up economy. And as part of his election platform, he ran on this notion of having a $100 million Municipal Innovation Fund to kind of form a center of gravity to draw in other enlightened investment. And I think that's really brilliant. And then, of course, it fell to us to develop the strategy for the $100 million fund. And now it will have to go through its approval paces. But what I learned from that experience is that we are transitioning from a resource economy to a digital and knowledge-based economy, and we haven't brought the investors along with us in Western Canada. They're very comfortable to invest in oil, gas, mining, forestry, and fisheries, but if you present them with a digital offering or a VR or a hydrogen offering, they do not understand how to evaluate the risk and potential. So as a city, we also need to bring our investors along. We can't just accelerate companies. We have to accelerate investors.
Great. Elder Anwar, your colleague from Kazakhstan, was very honest. He said, build it and they will come. Does not always work. Actually, rarely it works. What do you think is the next target there?
I think it's, as Kazakhs, it's like a hardcore truth. It's would like to share, but it's a reflection point when we reflect. And for over the past 30 years, what we have done as an independent state, what was successful, what not. And I would like to share from my experience also focusing and trying to create this innovation ecosystem. Very important to bring on board incumbents. Because when we see and analyze the primarily drivers of innovation, we're saying the problem is not with talents, because especially in Kazakhstan, very ambitious, young, well-educated people, I mean, actually, they have very ambitious plan, they would like to perform. There is no problem with talents. I mean, there is no problem with capital, because it's for new ideas, usually it's not the capital-intensive ideas. I mean, it's innovative ideas. What we have seen that it's primarily the three main problems we face. It's for young companies, startups, the critical is access to market, because they need to test their ideas, because it's most of the innovation they bring, it's like a proof of concept. They need to prove it. They need to go, because they are not building the businesses, they are not building organization, they're just building the products, building the features, and you need to create this access to market when it's actually they test it. And what is the second we see with young people, I mean, young companies, that is primarily they need expertise. Because it's, you know, when you have the startup, you have to like a unique knowledge or unique know-how, but usually they're weak as organization, as businesses, and you need support. And the third one is what we consider, we call the mentor capital, because you need someone who's actually to help them to avoid big mistakes. From that point of view, it's, I would say, here, onboarding incumbents, making them mentors, and giving more like an emotional pride in helping these youngsters helps a lot. That is something we're doing in Kazakhstan today.
How about Qatar? What are your three, you talked about three startups. Which areas, where would you invest?
Qatar, I mean, every city in the world has different situation, and I think Qatar and Doha particularly is in a very unique situation that probably will require different approach from other cities. If we look on Qatar and Doha, the infrastructure is very good in terms of enabling infrastructure for innovation, let's say. Highways, digital infrastructure, education, universities. We have 30 plus universities. Some of the big names like Texas A&M, Carnegie Mellon, they open branch campuses. Qatar University is the largest one in Qatar, in Doha, and is ranked in the recent ranking between 200 to 250, which is mainly coming from R&D. And just to give a benchmark, Texas A&M is 183, and Queen's Mary University, which Ian was here on the panel yesterday, is 198. So there is all these ingredients that is there in Doha for enabling ecosystem, but the ecosystem is not there. So the first thing I would probably do as a mayor is designing the ecosystem and finding the gaps and then bridging these gaps. We have gaps in angel investors, in venture capital, in policies and regulations. That's huge gaps. The other thing is to enable the education institutes, the R&D, and make much more collaboration, strategic partnership with the industry and government, the triple helix approach. This would make a huge difference, I believe. And the third one is, I think, is the most important one, is to develop the talent and attract the best talent in the world. Particularly the Qatar is swimming in an ocean of talent in the Middle East and North Africa. Europe is nearby, Africa is also nearby. So there's huge talent that can be attracted for Doha to become the next Singapore or the next innovation city. That's what, and another particular thing about Qatar also, the majority of economy is coming from large enterprises. So if we start focusing on startups, ecosystem development, and so on, we need to work on the value chain of these particular industries, like the oil and gas, the aviation, the media, and so on. So start focusing on startups that serve the value chain of these large enterprises.
George?
Yeah, if it was for any European city, I would say these days require energy, innovation in energy. clean energy and environment. This is going to be, in my opinion, the big values and technologies coming out from digital, from quantum, from 3D electronics will all support big-time innovation in energy. But because you said about Yanina, which is a Greek city, I would add to that innovation around our cultural heritage. This is very, very important for this country and its future, and for the economy of this country, and also to play a big part starting now in all the efforts and the innovation about bringing a human-centric character to these fast-changing technologies. I think Greek cities can play a very big role in all this dialogue that is just starting about ethics in all these disruptive technologies.
Great. One more very quick question. Let's start with Catherine. Is there room in these efforts for international collaborations? And if there is room, what are the challenges that we'll face for international collaborations?
Well, there's so much room in this room for international collaboration and beyond. One thing I would say is now is really our chance to build cities of innovators. So cities are home to 50% of the world's population, and we are also responsible for more than 50% of global emissions. So really focusing on populations that are responsible and accountable for the problems and making them part of the solution. I would also say that we could work on taking innovation out of the domain of pure play business and putting it back into the hands of citizens or residents, because when people start to see themselves as part of the solution, of course, they are engaged. And as we learned on the Gallup panel, that there's a gap in engagement. And so we need to help make that connection. And that will allow young people to remain in the talent pool, which is, of course, critical. I can also imagine us having a joint commitment to things like transparency and open data, to honest communications with residents, and to things like credible media. And if we do this as a group, which is a tall order, but listening to all of you, I think it's possible, we are going to be unstoppable. In terms of challenges, well, you know, I do see countries becoming more nationalistic, and it will be up to all of us to maintain these friendships and relationships that we've built here, because we are the key to keeping that door open.
Thank you. And Spiro, do you have anything to add from a university perspective?
Yes, I spoke earlier on about life sciences and biotechnology, and I think it's a great area of opportunity for international collaboration, but I think what is making it harder is that a lot of this research and innovation is funded by government agencies, and government agencies between different countries need to coordinate and collaborate in a different way than they're collaborating right now. Not only they need to collaborate and be more coordinated and coherent, they need to be also much faster in how they invest in cross-country collaborations. And I think that's probably the most serious impediment, I think, right now that I can see.
Anybody to add to this before? Because I want to keep my promise. I want to get a couple of questions from the...
What we see the last few years is a shift, a change in the world scene, and we see for the first time, if you want, non-for-profit international venture capital funds, funds that aim towards building power, not necessarily wealth. What worries me, though, so these, of course, they guarantee some sort of international collaborations, but what worries me is that these collaborations are expected to be limited within strategic alliances, either economic or defense.
Right, we have 5 minutes, so we'll take questions from everybody once. Yes, go ahead.
talk about, hello? Yes, we talk about collaborations, but we are experiencing what we call techno-nationalism. So we've seen collaborations working fine, for instance, in the COVID vaccines. At the same time, we see the disruptions because of COVID in global value chains and semiconductors, which is an element in which accelerates the pressures of techno-nationalism. So what is the solution there? Thank you. As an impediment, I mean, it's an impediment. So how collaborations can survive techno-nationalism?
So who wants to take this question?
It's a very tough one. I mean, I'm not sure, Marina, they will survive. I see some of them being doomed, basically. Right now, you know, all of us making the first steps into the new technologies such as quantum computing and the race towards quantum supremacy. Basically, we have to sign off that we will collaborate with exclusive centers and universities and industries around the world and nobody else. So I'm not very optimistic that this can be surpassed.
From a different angle, by making an observation, I think that where international collaborations have worked well is when we had very large-scale projects that required it could not be done by any individual country on its own, at least not very cost-effectively. Most of those have been around physics, very large-scale facilities, but COVID was a good example of a life sciences problem that was large-scale and had to be addressed from multiple dimensions. So I would say being able to define these larger-scale programs that require international collaboration is probably an essential, a necessary, but perhaps not sufficient requirement for doing that.
Mm-hmm. I would just pick up on that because I had an opportunity to work some years ago at CERN as a science journalist, and not only are they solving large global problems with scientists from all over the world, but this notion of working on, let's say, pure science draws in a lot of other types of thinkers too. And so at CERN, there were artists, there were writers, there were other kinds of thinkers that were drawn to that giant vision. It was very mobilizing. And so they then bring all of their networks to the table, and that can help break down the techno-nationalism that might be focused more in areas like, I would imagine, defense.
Elder?
I think it's today, maybe from the practical point of view, when you say techno-nationalism, for example, if you travel to the States today, you have to be vaccinated and you have to have the US-approved vaccine, CDC approved. That is CDC rules. Otherwise, you cannot travel, for example. I was lucky to get the US vaccine, in the States, while actually I had the vaccine in Kazakhstan, but it was not recognized. There are some, small impediments. And the same, it's like an election in the US. You have the midterms. It's like the people focus on the inflation, abortion rights, crime. Unfortunately, what we need to raise the awareness and the activism, because we need to speak. Because clearly today, for example, we're in Kazakhstan, somewhere in between, divided the Western world, China, Russia, and we're concerned the cloud technologies, if they will be accessible. Because for us, it's, I'm not saying about quantum computing or some others, for example, it's just access to technologies, to knowledge, and it's really critical. And it's today, unfortunately, it's a more bureaucratic approach. It's nobody cares. And I think the activism, especially from the research centers and universities, are really critical for that.
And if I can add my 2 cents, I'll go back to what we heard earlier. Trust, trust, trust. You can collaborate and you can work with somebody with whom you have trust in. If you don't share common values, you cannot trust the other side. The Germans are discovering this winter, and I know it's a big crisis. If you don't trust the same values on the other side, you may be taking a huge risk. So I think that's what will lead us to some restrictions with whom do you work and how.
Even CERN is making very tough decisions as we speak. So,
well, 39 seconds early. Please join me in thanking the panel. You did a great job.